"This bag is worth more than you," yelled the alien heiress. Moments before he saved her life, the orbital promenade of Veli's Prime glittered under artificial sunlight, stretching in endless curves above the black void of space. Ships of all sizes drifted past the transparent observation domes, and the citizens of the station walked its corridors like ants along a clear path. The promenade was a place of wealth and spectacle, reserved mostly for the rich and powerful. And at that moment, no one was more visible than Syrinx Valquorin, heiress of the Valquorin line, a family whose wealth was said to be older than half the human colonies. Syrinx's boots clicked sharply on the polished floor, a sound that drew eyes from dozens of passers-by. Her long robe, shimmering with metallic threads, hinted at status without even trying. In one hand, she carried a bag, small but impossibly heavy in appearance. Its surface seemed to absorb light and shimmer with changing colors, like liquid gemstones caught in a prism. Those who knew its value did not dare look directly at it. Whispers spread through the promenade like wildfire. She was unaware that her day was about to change in the most human way possible. Elias Trent was a human porter, a contracted worker responsible for logistics and package delivery on Veli's Prime. Humans were common in these roles, often overlooked, undervalued, and sometimes mocked for their small size and fragile biology. Elias fit the stereotype perfectly, lean, quiet, with hands calloused from years of carrying cargo. But he had learned to notice things others ignored. A slight shift in gravity, the faint whir of a hidden machine, or the way a wealthy alien fidgeted when nervous. He was pushing a cart with a collection of delivery boxes, all labeled in alien script he could barely read. One box wobbled as he moved, and his sleeve brushed against the promenade railing. Nothing unusual except that Syrinx, moving in her characteristic slow and deliberate fashion, had chosen that exact moment to pivot sharply around a corner. The cart nudged her bag, just a tiny touch. The world seemed to pause. Syrinx turned, her eyes narrowing into slits. "This bag is worth more than you," she shouted, her voice cutting through the murmurs of the crowd. "Do you even know what you've touched, human?" Elias froze. All he had done was brush the bag. He opened his mouth, then closed it, knowing any reply would probably make things worse. Around him, people gasped. A few laughed nervously. Syrinx's bodyguards, towering creatures with 4 arms each, looked momentarily confused, unused to public embarrassment. Syrinx sniffed and raised the bag higher as if to shield it from further insult. "Get out of my way," she barked, gesturing to the corridor behind her. Elias stepped back, but his eyes followed the bag. There was something about it, a faint hum he didn't recognize. He didn't understand the physics of it or why it seemed to react to touch, but his instincts told him it was important. "Are you going to apologize?" Syrinx demanded, narrowing her golden eyes. Elias shook his head. I didn't touch it, not really," he said softly. His voice barely carried, but somehow the conviction in it was noticeable. "You insolent," she began, but stopped herself. The promenade was crowded now, and the crowd's eyes were on them. A murmur ran through the onlookers. The heiress was furious, yes, but this human had dared speak back. That was rare. "Look, I can move the cart," Elias said. He carefully nudged it to the side, keeping his hands clear of her bag. "I don't want to cause trouble." Syrinx's lips curled. "Trouble? You are trouble, human. My ancestors would have this kind of clumsiness." She waved a hand dismissively. "Eradicated." Elias' eyes flicked up to her face. He noticed a flash of anxiety beneath her carefully constructed arrogance. Most of her family's wealth was built on appearances, but real power came from knowledge, and in this case he suspected the bag might contain both. "Are you done?" she snapped, clearly growing impatient. Elias swallowed. Yes," he said, trying to keep his voice steady. "I'm done." For a moment, the tension hung in the air like thick smoke. Syrinx sniffed again and turned on her heel, letting her robe swirl behind her. Her entourage followed, muttering among themselves about the human's audacity. Elias watched her leave, a strange feeling settling in his chest. Most humans would have ignored her, accepted the insult, and moved on. But something about this situation didn't sit right with him. The bag, the way it shimmered, and the subtle tension in her posture all hinted that this was more than a simple aristocratic tantrum. The crowd began to disperse, and the promenade returned to its usual hum of commerce and leisure. Elias resumed his work, but he couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. He noticed the small, almost imperceptible things. A flicker of the gravity rails, the way a service drone hovered a second too long near a maintenance hatch, the faint odor of ozone that suggested electrical systems were stressed. Alone, any of these might have been normal. Together, they formed a pattern that his human instincts recognized. A setup. Humans were good at patterns. Humans were good at survival. That was why they had survived on Earth and later on the fringe colonies when stronger, faster, or smarter species had failed. And for all the arrogance of the Valquoran line, no alien had that survival instinct in the same subtle way. Elias shook his head, trying to focus. He had deliveries to finish, and he was not about to get involved with alien politics, or so he thought. Syrinx, meanwhile, was still fuming. She had been trained from birth to value artifacts above all else. Her bag was rumored to contain a relic connected to an ancient treaty, something so valuable that entire corporations had tried, and failed, to steal it. Now a human had touched it, and the thought alone made her blood boil. "Did you see him?" she hissed to her aide. "He dared a human, how insulting!" The aide, a lithe creature with scales that shimmered like copper, bowed slightly. "He seems different, Miss Syrinx." "He didn't cower or apologize," Syrinx snorted. "Different, he's reckless, I will have him punished." But even as she said it, her mind raced. Why hadn't he panicked? Why hadn't he tried to steal from her? And why did he seem aware, more aware than most of her species ever were? Elias continued his rounds, but his mind kept returning to Syrinx and the bag. He tried to dismiss it, focusing on the mundane, crates, orders, routes. But the anomalies he had noticed in the promenade, the small glitches, the faint hums, the imperceptible misalignments, were all pointing in one direction. Something was happening on the station, something dangerous, and humans had a way of noticing danger before others did. Hours later, as the artificial sun of Veli's prime dipped toward its evening cycle, Elias returned to his small quarters in the workers' module. The walls were plain, functional, and slightly scratched from decades of use, but they were his own space. He removed his boots and sat, running a hand through his hair. He replayed the incident in his mind. Syrinx Valquoran, the heiress, the aristocrat, the embodiment of everything humans were told to be wary of, had underestimated him. The bag, the promenade, the slight chaos in the systems, all of it pointed toward something bigger. Elias didn't know what it was yet, but he knew this: the humans who survived didn't wait to be noticed. They acted, and when the moment came, they acted decisively. Little did Elias know, the moment was about to come much sooner than he expected. The promenade emptied, and the lights of Veli's prime shifted to the night cycle. Outside the station, stars blinked cold and indifferent. But inside, somewhere among the wealth, the power, and the glittering displays, a human had just become more than an annoyance. And the universe was about to take notice. The next day on Veli's prime, the promenade appeared calm, but Elias felt a strange tension in the air. The station, which usually buzzed with merchants, tourists, and wealthy aliens flaunting their possessions, had an odd quietness. It was subtle, like a storm hidden behind blue skies, but Elias, a human trained to notice details, sensed it immediately. He pushed his cart along the curved corridor, moving crates and packages as usual. His eyes scanned constantly, not out of paranoia, but habit. Humans were like that. Survival depended on observation, noticing small patterns, and acting before problems became disasters. Then he saw it. A service drone, normally routine and unthinking, hovered slightly off its programmed path. It paused, its sensor arm twitching as if testing the air. Elias frowned. It wasn't damaged, it wasn't malfunctioning, but it wasn't supposed to pause there. He made a note in his mind, like a detective noticing a small clue. Another anomaly appeared. A maintenance hatch clicked open on its own. It was minor, easily missed by anyone else, but to Elias it was an early warning. He frowned. Nothing in the station just malfunctioned like that without reason. He glanced around. The promenade was filled with tourists and shoppers, most unaware of anything amiss. Syrinx Valquoran's entourage swept past, carrying the glittering bag as if it were alive. Syrinx herself walked with an air of superiority, still furious from the previous day's incident. But even she didn't notice the signs of danger. Elias felt a chill. Humans had always survived because they acted where others hesitated. And right now, the station was hiding something dangerous, something most of its wealthy inhabitants couldn't even perceive. Hours passed. Elias continued his deliveries, moving from corridor to corridor, and with each step more irregularities appeared. A gravity panel flickered, briefly tilting the floor by a few degrees. A security drone paused mid-route, as though debating which direction to go. Even the lights in the promenade dimmed for just a fraction of a second, imperceptible to the untrained eye but obvious to Elias. "This isn't random," he muttered under his breath. He stopped near a corner, ducked behind a crate, and observed. A group of maintenance droids moved past, performing tasks that seemed normal on the surface. But Elias noticed the pattern. Every few minutes, a different system on the station. Power grids, gravity stabilizers, life support monitors shifted slightly in perfect sequence. It was a deliberate attempt to test or sabotage the station. Most aliens would not notice it, or they would panic in confusion. Humans, however, had evolved to survive with minimal resources and under unpredictable conditions. Elias' mind raced, connecting dots, forming patterns. Something was coming, and it wasn't an accident. Meanwhile, Serix Valquorin continued her day, blissfully unaware. She visited boutiques, waved at fans, and allowed her entourage to carry her bag with utmost care. Wealth and status gave her confidence, but they also blinded her to danger. Her aide noticed Elias watching from a distance. "Miss Serix," the aide whispered, "that human he's observing." Serix waved a hand dismissively. "Let him, humans are weak. They see too much and yet they understand nothing." She smiled, arrogant and careless. "I would not fear him even if he tried to interfere." But her smile faltered as the promenade's lights flickered. Just a subtle pulse, barely noticeable, but enough to make her stomach tighten. She glanced around, but the crowd's chatter and movement masked the change. Elias, however, saw it clearly. By mid-afternoon, the anomalies became more obvious. A security drone misdirected several travelers, creating small collisions. Gravity rails wavered slightly, and an automated door slammed unexpectedly. People stumbled, laughed nervously, or cursed under their breath. Serix's guards scowled, adjusting their routes. Elias noticed another clue. The flickering lights formed a sequence like Morse code. He paused, crouched behind a pillar, and listened to the hum of the station. Each minor malfunction wasn't random. Someone, or something, was sending signals through the station's systems. He calculated quickly. The pattern was logical, methodical, and intelligent. Someone was trying to take control of the station. Most humans would not have noticed until it was too late. Serix, meanwhile, became more uneasy. The bag seemed to vibrate slightly against her arm. She glanced at it nervously, then at Elias, who was still watching from afar. "Do you feel that?" she whispered to her aide. "It's nothing, Miss Serix," the aide said, though her own tail twitched with unease. "The station is old, systems sometimes flicker." Serix shook her head. "No, this feels wrong." She adjusted the bag tightly against her chest. "Keep moving and stay close. I do not like this." The promenade suddenly erupted into chaos. A group of tourists stumbled as the gravity rails shifted again. A small display panel sparked and hissed. People screamed, though no one was hurt. Security drones scrambled, trying to regain control. Elias sprang into action. He didn't panic. Humans rarely did when there was no time to think. He ran along the promenade, checking each anomaly as he passed. He noticed the patterns, how each disturbance was not random, but a rehearsal for something larger. His mind raced. If they target the bag, Elias realized the danger immediately. Someone was trying to steal or manipulate the Heiress's artifact. And they didn't care about humans, guards, or station authorities. They only cared about the target, the bag. Serix's entourage began to tighten around her. She noticed Elias running toward the disturbances. "Why is he here?" she hissed. "Why is he interfering?" Her aide glanced nervously. "He seems to understand what's happening." "Understand?" Serix barked. "He is just a human. Humans are weak. They cannot even carry their own weight without collapsing." But Serix didn't notice the small change in her own heartbeat, the way her hands trembled slightly as the bag pulsed against her chest. Her instincts, honed over centuries of aristocratic training, sensed danger. She realized, perhaps too late, that the human had noticed it too, and might be the only one capable of acting. Elias reached the source of the disturbances, a control panel for a minor gravity section. Most aliens would have frozen, overwhelmed by the blinking lights and strange hums. Elias didn't hesitate. He examined the panel quickly, running his fingers over exposed wires and circuits. He didn't understand all of it, but he understood enough. Someone had inserted logic-based sabotage into the system, a pattern designed to test reactions and identify weaknesses. Humans had survived logic traps like this before in old colony systems, in survival games, in resource crises. He recognized the style, calculated, predictable, but not invincible. He set to work. Using his knowledge of human intuition, improvisation, and quick thinking, he began to stabilize the systems, rerouting minor power flows and adjusting grav controls manually. Minutes passed. The anomalies ceased one by one. The promenade returned to normal. The crowd murmured in relief, unaware of how close they had been to catastrophe. Syrinx, finally noticing the human at work, approached him. "What are you doing?" she demanded, her voice sharp, more frightened than angry now. Elias didn't look up. "Preventing a disaster," he said simply. "Your bag isn't safe, the station is compromised." She blinked. "Compromised? How, who, why?" "Someone is testing the systems," Elias said. "They want to know what will fail and what will hold. They are not concerned with you, yet. But they are observing, and you are the target." For a moment, Syrinx was silent. She had never been told that her life, let alone her bag, could be at risk in such a subtle way. She had wealth, guards, and status. But none of it could replace someone who understood the unseen threat. Her eyes widened. You see it?" Elias nodded. "I see it, and if you don't move carefully, someone will use this station against you." For the first time, Syrinx realized her arrogance had blinded her. Humans were not weak. Humans were unpredictable. Humans survived because they acted when others hesitated. And this human, Elias Trent, had just become her only real hope. The station hummed quietly as if nothing had happened, but Elias knew the danger was far from over. The saboteur or saboteurs had tested the station's systems today. They would return stronger, smarter, more dangerous. He had noticed the first signs. That was the human advantage, noticing danger before it was too late. Syrinx's hand tightened on her bag. For the first time, she didn't care about the wealth inside. She cared about the human who had saved her from disaster she hadn't even recognized. And in that moment, the arrogance of centuries began to crack. Because in a universe full of wealth, status, and power, one simple human had already made all the difference. The night cycle of Veli's prime was quiet, almost eerily so. Artificial lights along the orbital promenade glowed softly, casting long reflections on the polished floors. The crowds had thinned. The rich had retired to their luxury suites, and the tourists to observation decks. Only a few workers, like Elias Trent, remained, completing late deliveries. Elias had been monitoring the anomalies since morning. The sabotage he had noticed earlier was far from random. It was escalating. Gravity panels continued to flicker in precise intervals. Security drones moved with strange hesitation, and life support systems had brief, almost imperceptible failures. Whoever was behind it was intelligent and patient. They were testing the station, looking for weaknesses, and they were moving closer to their real target. Syrinx Valquorin, heiress of the Valquorin line, was walking the promenade with her entourage. The bag she carried shimmered faintly under the lights. It was more than an accessory. It was a relic, a piece of history, and perhaps a key to something far larger. But she did not know that. All she knew was that it was hers, and anyone who touched it without permission would suffer consequences. The first hint that something was wrong came from the subtle hiss of vented air. A corridor ahead of her began sealing automatically, sliding doors clicking as they locked one by one. At first, she thought it was a normal security protocol, but then she noticed the slight tilt of the floor beneath her boots. The gravity panels were misaligned again. "Something is wrong," she whispered to her aide. Her voice trembled slightly, though she tried to hide it. Her aide, a lithe, copper-scaled creature named Trivis, looked around nervously. "It is likely a malfunction, Miss Syrinx. The station is old. Systems sometimes behave." "Malfunction?" Syrinx snapped. "No, I know a malfunction when I see one. This is deliberate." Elias had been following discreetly. From a distance, he saw the corridor beginning to seal, life support venting slightly to depressurize the area. He realized immediately someone was trying to trap her. There was no time to wait. Humans were often underestimated precisely because they acted while others hesitated. Elias sprinted down the promenade, navigating between the remaining tourists and minor maintenance droids. His focus was entirely on the Heiress ahead. The doors began sliding shut faster now. Syrinx noticed and froze. Her guards moved to block the path behind her, their multi-armed frames bristling. But the corridors were narrow, and the automated doors were programmed to ignore personnel presence. In moments, she would be trapped. "Move!" Elias shouted, even though she could not hear him over the whirring systems. He leapt over a small barrier and pressed his shoulder against the closing door. The mechanism groaned but paused, held by sheer human force. Syrinx looked up, eyes wide, and finally saw him. "Human," she exclaimed. "What, why? Not why," Elias shouted. "Now move." Syrinx hesitated. Aristocrats like her were trained to obey protocol, not raw instinct. Her entourage began arguing over proper procedures. Guards debated risk and liability. The bag, precious and irreplaceable, was clutched against her chest, more precious than the life of the human holding the door. But Elias had no time for hesitation. Humans survived by acting decisively. He held the door with all his strength and shouted, "Out, now!" With a mixture of fear and incredulity, Syrinx followed his lead. She stumbled past the doorway just as the last section of the corridor sealed completely behind them, trapping her entourage inside. Her heart pounded not just from fear, but from the realization that her precious bag had almost become useless if she stayed in one place too long. She looked at Elias, who was panting slightly, muscles tensed. "You," she began. "You saved me." Elias nodded once. "Yes. And if you don't trust me, you may not survive the next attempt." The station systems were still malfunctioning in subtle ways. Gravity rails tilted, lights flickered, and a faint hiss of vented air could be heard from nearby sections. Someone was orchestrating this chaos with precision. It wasn't random. It was designed to test her, test the bag, and test the station's response. Syrinx's guards finally managed to reopen the corridor from the other side, but they looked at Elias with suspicion rather than gratitude. "He's just a human," one muttered. "Why would he interfere?" Syrinx's eyes narrowed, but she didn't reply. She was realizing that humans did things differently. They acted on instinct, not wealth. They solved problems without consulting centuries of protocol. She glanced down at the bag she held, and then back at Elias. You risked yourself for me," she said softly, almost incredulously. Elias shrugged. "It's what humans do. We act when necessary." The situation was not yet safe. Elias scanned the corridor ahead. He noticed a subtle vibration in the walls, a frequency that suggested sabotage in the electrical grid. Whoever was behind this wasn't just trying to trap her physically. They were preparing to attack the systems that kept the station running. "Miss Syrinx," Elias said, crouching slightly, "we need to move to a safer area." "Now," Syrinx hesitated. Aristocrats were used to being carried, escorted, and protected by technology and servants. But she had learned something today. The bag, her wealth, and even her guards could not save her against a clever, patient enemy. Elias moved first, signaling her to follow. She did, clutching the bag tightly but now listening to him rather than dictating. Humans were unpredictable, yes, but effective. That was a truth she hadn't yet admitted aloud. As they moved through the station's twisting corridors, Elias explained briefly. "Someone is testing the station. Small failures, minor malfunctions, it's to find weaknesses. The next failure could be deadly if we don't act fast." Syrinx was silent. She was processing, thinking of her family, her status, her lifelong lessons about wealth and control. And then she realized she had underestimated this human. Elias was not just a laborer. He understood danger, he acted on instinct, and he valued life over possessions. Her hands tightened on the bag. "And you value life more than possessions?" Elias gave a small, wry smile. "Always, wealth can be replaced, people can't." Syrinx blinked. That simple statement, human in its clarity, shook her worldview. The bag, which had always been her most prized possession, suddenly seemed secondary. They reached a junction where several corridors met. Elias paused and listened. He could hear the faint whir of drones moving in patterns, the hiss of vented air, and the low hum of unstable circuits. "They're moving faster," he whispered. "We don't have much time. The next section could seal automatically, or worse." Syrinx followed closely, no longer arguing, no longer attempting to assert authority. For the first time, she realized her survival depended entirely on this human's instincts. She allowed him to lead, trusting his knowledge over her own centuries of training. The corridor ahead began to tilt slightly, gravity fluctuating. A misstep could send them sliding into a closed door or worse. Elias adjusted his footing and guided Syrinx carefully. Every movement was precise. Humans were not fast or strong compared to her guards, but they were agile, adaptable, and willing to take risks when necessary. They passed the hazard unscathed. Syrinx's eyes were wide with astonishment. "You," she said softly, almost a whisper. You saved me again. Elias didn't respond immediately. He was scanning the next corridor. His mind worked like a machine, calculating angles, pressures, and timing. This isn't over, he said finally. We need to get to the control hub. That's the safest place, at least until we figure out what's happening. The control hub was several corridors away. As they moved, minor alarms began to beep, a warning of failing systems in other sections. Sarex's guards tried to catch up but were slowed by the automated doors and fluctuating gravity. They yelled, argued, and protested protocol, but Elias ignored them. Humans survived by focusing on the problem, not politics. Finally, they reached the hub. It was a room full of consoles, lights, and monitors, the nerve center for Veli's prime station systems. Elias immediately began assessing the systems, checking for patterns, and stabilizing critical circuits. Sarex watched in awe as he worked. He didn't just push buttons, he understood the patterns, anticipated failures, and corrected anomalies before they became dangerous. You are remarkable, she admitted softly. I thought humans were weak. Elias gave a small smile, still focused on the consoles. Weak. No, we survive, that's different. Minutes passed. The station stabilized for now. Elias had temporarily thwarted the sabotage, but he knew the attackers would not give up. Whoever orchestrated this was intelligent, patient, and ruthless. Sarex finally set the bag down on a console. She no longer clutched it obsessively. For the first time, she realized that no wealth, no artifact, and no status could replace the human who had saved her life. You, she said softly, you are worth more than any treasure I own. Elias looked up and nodded. Then let's make sure you live to protect that treasure. The statement was simple, but it carried weight. Humans acted on principle, on instinct, on courage. They did not wait for permission. And in that moment, Sarex understood that she had been wrong. Humans were not to be underestimated. Outside, the promenade continued its quiet hum, unaware of the life-and-death decisions unfolding within. But one human had already changed everything. And the universe, as always, would notice eventually. The control hub hummed with life, a quiet but insistent vibration beneath the floor. Screens flashed with data, some normal, some warning of minor failures, and some indecipherable codes that only someone with experience in logic patterns could interpret. Elias Trent leaned over the console, hands moving quickly and confidently, adjusting circuits and rerouting power flows. Sarex Valquorin stood behind him, bag in hand, watching with a mix of awe and fear. For the first time in her life, she realized that wealth, guards, and status meant nothing in the face of raw intelligence and instinct. She had assumed humans were weak, easily ignored, easily replaced. But Elias was proving her wrong. You understand all of this?" she asked quietly. Elias shook his head. "Not everything, but I understand enough to stop whoever is doing this for now." He typed commands rapidly, monitoring the stability of multiple systems simultaneously. Meanwhile, the saboteurs were closer than anyone realized. The anomalies in the station weren't random tests, they were reconnaissance. Each failure had a purpose, to locate the weaknesses in security, life support, and automated systems. Whoever had orchestrated this attack was preparing for something far larger than a simple theft. Elia's eyes flicked over the monitors. Something didn't fit. The patterns of system failure were too precise. Gravity panels, life support vents, automated doors, they all followed sequences he had seen before in old human colonies. But there was an additional layer, one that suggested intent rather than chaos. He spoke without looking up. "Miss Sarex, this isn't about your bag. They're after you, the bag is just bait." Sarex blinked, shocked. "Me? But why?" Elias paused, thinking. Humans were taught to consider motives and consequences. Aliens, on the other hand, often acted on greed, pride, or fear, but rarely with strategy. "Because you're the key to something important," he said finally. "Something bigger than wealth, something that affects the entire station, maybe even the political balance of your people." Sarex looked down at her bag, suddenly seeing it differently. The artifact, shimmering and priceless in appearance, was more than just a symbol of wealth. It was a tool, a key, a target. And she had been unaware. Her aide, Trivis, trembled slightly. "Miss Sarex, what should we do?" Sarex didn't answer immediately. She glanced at Elias, who was already assessing their next move. Humans acted with calm in the face of danger, relying on observation and quick thinking rather than authority or tradition. And right now, she realized, He was the only one who could keep them safe. "We follow him," she said finally. "I trust him." Travis's tail flicked nervously, but he nodded. "As you wish, Miss Heiress." Elias moved to the next console, one controlling more complex systems, energy distribution, security overrides, and station-wide communication. Each screen displayed patterns of sabotage, sequences of failures deliberately staggered to confuse and mislead. He studied the codes, recognizing a familiar method. "These are logic-based sabotage codes," he murmured. "Someone is testing responses." "Not to steal, but to control." Sarex leaned over his shoulder. "Control, they could take over the station." "Exactly," Elias said. "And if they take over, no one will get out alive, not you, not your entourage, not even the humans who work here. They want the bag, yes, but mostly, they want leverage." The revelation hit Sarex hard. She had spent her life believing wealth and status could protect her. She had guards, weapons, and connections. But none of it mattered when someone could manipulate the very systems of the station. Her hands tightened around the bag. "And you think you can stop them?" Elias didn't answer immediately. Humans rarely made promises they couldn't keep. Instead, he focused on the task at hand, stabilizing the station, predicting the saboteurs' next moves, and keeping Sarex safe. Minutes passed. The station hummed, lights flickering occasionally as Elias worked. Then he noticed something critical, a backdoor code hidden deep in the system. It wasn't just a flaw, they had deliberately inserted a method to override key station functions remotely. "This is it," he muttered. "This is how they plan to control everything. I need to isolate it." He moved quickly, rerouting circuits, cutting access points, and creating temporary firewalls. The station's systems responded, stabilizing in small increments. But Elias knew this was only a temporary solution. Whoever had done this would return, stronger and more prepared. Sarex watched silently, realizing something she had never understood before. Humans were not weak. They survived because they acted decisively, calculated risks, and relied on instinct as much as intellect. And Elias was the perfect example. You are remarkable," she whispered. I never realized humans could do this." Elias gave a small smile. "We survive, that's what we do." She looked at her bag, suddenly seeing it in a new light. It was important, yes, but not as important as the human who had saved her from a threat she hadn't even understood. Outside the control hub, the saboteurs were already planning their next move. The anomalies they had introduced earlier were only a test, a rehearsal for a larger attack. They had underestimated Elias, underestimating the human ability to notice patterns, to act on instinct, and to solve problems quickly under pressure. Humans were unpredictable in ways that machines and aliens alike could not anticipate, and that unpredictability was their greatest strength. Elias leaned back slightly, analyzing the patterns one last time. He could predict the saboteurs' next move. He could anticipate their logic, and most importantly, he could protect Sarex. Hours passed as the station slowly stabilized. Systems returned to normal, alarms faded, and the faint hum of life support became steady again. Sarex finally lowered the bag to a console, no longer clutching it obsessively. You are worth more than any treasure I own," she said softly, looking at Elias. Elias paused, then nodded. "Then let's make sure you survive long enough to protect it." It was a simple statement, but it carried weight. Humans acted on principle, on courage, and on instinct. They did not wait for permission. And in that moment, Sarex realized that she had been wrong all her life. Humans were not to be underestimated. As the night deepened, the station remained calm, but Elias knew the danger was far from over. Whoever had tried to sabotage the station would return with greater force and more cunning strategies. But Elias also knew something else. Humans survived where others failed. And the universe, it seemed, had just been reminded of that fact. Sarex, clutching her bag once more, no longer felt invincible because of wealth or status. She felt alive because a human had acted when others would have hesitated. And that was more valuable than any treasure in the galaxy.